Hello there, and welcome to Tales of the Force, a place for fans to tell their Star Wars stories. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. This month, I am specifically highlighting stories of fans that are also wanting to share about their mental health journey. Because of this added personal component, these stories will go over our normal episode time. Joining me today is Rory. Rory is 35 years old and has loved Star Wars since he was 6 when the original Trilogy VHS box set was released. He loves all of the movies and shows, and his favorite character is Obi-Wan. He also is a screenwriter and film director, and George Lucas is one of his biggest inspirations. He is a mental health advocate and is very open about his own struggles with obsessive compulsive disorder and general anxiety disorder. Don't forget, this is Rory's personal story. It is not my place on the show to dismiss, diminish, judge, or have an opinion on his story. Any views, thoughts, or opinions expressed are his own. Any comments on this episode and story are expected to be respectful. In this episode, we do talk about mental health and the challenges it has for both of us. With discussing our personal experiences, I, the host, and Rory, the guest, are not providing any medical or professional advice on the YouTube channel or podcast. Anything said should not be taken as a replacement for medical, clinical, professional advice, diagnosis, or medical intervention. With all of that out of the way, please help me in welcoming Rory to Tales of the Force. Hey, Rory, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
I am doing good. I have just been kind of hanging out today, catching up on things. You know how it goes.
Yeah, yeah, I
One
do.
of those adulting days, which is
Yes,
never
those happen.
the most fun, but it has to happen. But I'm excited to be on here talking to you about Star Wars and
Yeah, me
your
too.
Star Wars journey and all of that. So I guess to go ahead and get into it, what got you into this franchise of Star Wars?
Well, I don't think I had seen it like on TV prior to 1995. I was 6,
Mm-hmm.
and 1995 was the year that the VHS box set came out, and I believe also when they relaunched the action figures. I think it was starting to be in preparation for the prequels, because this wasn't the special editions yet in '97. This was the original versions in '95. And so I had that VHS box set where New Hope had Vader on it, Empire had a Stormtrooper on it, and Return of the Jedi had Yoda on it. And I still have that VHS box set. I just remember everybody was getting those. I think I was in first grade, and everybody was like getting the box set and asking each other, "Well, did you get it?" And we were all getting the action figures. And of course, my parents knew what it was. My dad was very familiar with it. He had seen them before, but that was where I really started to watch them, and I probably wore those tapes out watching them. I still remember that it has the little preview at the beginning that says it's own the originals one last time, or whatever, because they were about to change them. Um, but yeah, so that was my introduction, and I also, it's because I was 6 years old. I really really connect with the line that Cassian says in Rogue One, where he says, "I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old," because I was like,
I love
well, so have I. So
it. That's
yeah,
amazing. You're like, yes,
yeah,
I have been doing this since I was 6 too.
hmm, yep,
Did
yeah,
you see the prequels in theaters, and do you remember that?
yes. Didn't see the special editions in theaters. I don't. I guess it was because we had them on VHS, and you know, at that time it was like, oh well, if you have it at home, you watch it at home. There
Yeah.
wasn't like this idea. Like, I mean, at least when you're that young, it's not like, oh, re-release, go see this, because like my wife and I just went and saw the Phantom Menace re-release. We're like, oh yeah,
Yes.
absolutely, we're gonna do that. But no, didn't go see those. But then yes, did see Phantom Menace in theaters. I think we saw it maybe like a couple weeks after it came out. I know we didn't go opening weekend, but I remember all the the hype over it. Again, the action figures. There was that whole series of Pepsi cans that had all the characters on it, and I remember getting all those. And just that was 4 years later, so I was 10, and I went from having these three movies that I could watch, and was really into, and all of a sudden, a few years later, it's like, oh hey, brand new movie, but it takes place a long time ago. So that was a very interesting idea to me. But to me, it was just like new Star Wars. That's awesome. So went and saw Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith on opening weekend. I definitely remember that we went opening weekend for those. Um, and yeah, I mean, I always loved them from the get go, and I obviously grew up with them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's different phases in Star Wars, and each one is special to me for a different reason. So
Yeah.
yeah, so the prequels, while being relatively short time later in my young life, after seeing the originals for the first time, the prequels were like, you know, their own era, going all the way up to 2005.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really fun to get to talk to people that also were all around the same age when they came out. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really fun, and I find it really interesting that we all still love Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it hasn't really gone away. It's been
No.
maybe a little different for us at different places in our life or at different times in our lives, but here we are,
Mm-hmm.
as adults, and it's still here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very special that way.
Yeah. So how has different, I guess, characters or storylines followed you or impacted you throughout your life?
Well, my absolute favorite character is Obi-Wan, and that probably started with the prequels. Um, that was one of the things that, as a kid, I thought was so cool. I'm like, oh, you mean like that old guy in those movies? He's like really young in these movies, and like I think that was my first, probably many of us, that was our introduction to the concept of a prequel.
Mhm.
That, oh, you can make a new movie, but it takes place before. And so I really like the idea that, oh, now no, Obi-Wan's the young guy and all this stuff, and Darth Vader was a little kid and all this. So I love that whole dynamic. So I think that's where like I really started to connect with Obi-Wan was with the prequels. But yeah, I've always liked Obi-Wan. I think Sir Alec Guinness is classic in that role. Ewan McGregor obviously is one of the, I think, one of the best performances in all of Star Wars is Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan
Yeah.
across all the years. And then James Earl Taylor as well in the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
So I think just through all of that, I've just always connected with Obi-Wan, and I think that he's a character who he goes through the most amount of horrible things without turning to the dark side.
Mhm.
And I think that really speaks to who he is. And I find that very inspiring too, that he doesn't lose who he is along the way,
Yeah.
despite all the loss.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think it's really great to have a character that you can look up to or really love or try to emulate or whatever capacity that is for how you like that character, but to have a character that has gone through things, and so they're real and they're fleshed out well, and so you can relate to them, but they also still are something that you can look up to because they still, in the end, make the right choice or the choice that's for the good of everyone or themselves or, stay in the light or whatever that is. I think
Yeah.
it is really cool to have a character like that because sometimes either they can be good and they're just good and it's almost like they're perfect and they don't have anything that they really go through or they don't make any mistakes. But Obi-Wan is such a great character because he is good, but he's also very human and
Hmm.
he still struggles and he's still gone through hard things. And I love Obi-Wan too. And I think that's one of the things that makes him so relatable is the fact that he's not perfect,
Hmm.
but he still chooses the light, which is what you were saying, which is
Yeah.
really, really great.
Yeah. And I think Obi-Wan, like every major character in Star Wars, Force user kind of has that moment where the dark side like really tempts them. And for like Anakin and Luke and Rey, it comes towards the end of their like respective trilogies. It comes
Hmm.
towards the end of a certain amount of time that we've seen them on screen. So many years have passed or whatever. So much has happened. But with Obi-Wan, his moment comes at the beginning because uh, his moment is when he's kind of unleashing everything on Darth Maul after he's struck down Qui-Gon. And then when he's hanging there and everything, he has to kind of calm himself and that's Obi-Wan's dark side temptation moment. And it's just interesting that with everybody else it comes so much later, but his is kind of from the get-go. So he's kind of got that out of the way and over with, and then he's got his whole life and career ahead of him. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting aspect of him too.
Yeah, definitely. And then I like how even through obviously what happens with Anakin and then, things that you see in the Clone Wars and then the Kenobi show and even A New Hope, you see him still deal with hardships and people making not the best choices around him,
Hmm.
or losing someone that matters to him that he loves. And so I really love seeing him still be Obi-Wan.
Hmm.
Again, it's just very human though. Like, he's one of the characters that I feel like that you can just really, really, really empathize with as you're
Yeah.
going through this. And
Hmm.
he deals with everything that people deal with in real life, whether it's loss or betrayal or
Hmm.
even good times, losing a mentor, losing a brother, losing a best friend, losing, his love too.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I think, and then him going into also a teacher role of training like the next generation and what that looks like and having to deal with, are they going to be receptive to what I'm teaching them or not? And
Hmm.
it's such a really cool, almost life story of him because either other people have died or they've completely changed as a character, like Anakin becomes Darth Vader
Right.
and like he's through it, but it's completely different. And Obi-Wan, we really get to see him change and grow through so many different life cycles and like times of his life.
Hmm.
And I
And even
really,
after his life.
yes, that too. And
Yeah.
the effects that he has after. Um
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
I
really
think it's
cool.
interesting that he and Yoda don't believe Anakin can be redeemed,
Yeah.
uh but Luke does. But Obi-Wan's a ghost, and you think he's had his whole life, he's as wise as he can be, but then he's telling Luke, you gotta kill your dad or the Emperor wins,
Yeah.
and he's wrong, so it kind of I know we say this a lot, and this will probably get said a lot in this conversation, but the whole "it's poetry, it rhymes" quote from George
Yeah.
Lucas in Last Jedi, when Yoda tells Luke, "We are what they grow beyond." So that means that Obi-Wan is what Luke grew beyond, what happened with his father, or the way he handled what happened with his father. And, so that ultimately, connects back to Obi-Wan too, where I'm sure sometime after Return of the Jedi, Force Ghost Obi-Wan sits down and goes, okay, I was wrong, and I like that, even the wisest characters can still have something to learn in
Yeah.
Star Wars.
Yeah, I think Luke even says that, like in his hubris, he blah blah
Mm-hmm.
blah, and
Yeah.
it's that hubris, the ego of I have reached this point, and sometimes it's not even maybe like a conceited place that they're in. It's just
Mm-hmm.
I've lived this long and I've experienced these things, so I know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's still not right, or sometimes there's still something you can learn from. I don't know. I could geek out over the stories that you can learn from Star Wars and the lessons and the little nuggets
Oh
that's
yeah.
in there. I mean, I could talk about it all day. I love it so much.
There's there's always more to find. There are always reasons to go back. My
Yes.
wife and I are actually in the middle of our annual Star Wars marathon,
I love
because
it.
we watched Phantom Menace in theaters a
Yes.
few weeks ago. So we're like, well, I guess this is when we're doing the rewatch this year.
I love it. I
So
love it.
yeah, and there's always stuff to pick up on, always conversations to have, um, and like my wife especially, like she had seen Star Wars, but she wasn't into it until um, we met, and so we'll still, we'll be watching a movie, and she'll ask me to pause it, and she starts asking a question about like a character, and we just kind of like get into like this big 10-minute conversation about that character and their motivations, and then it's like, well, oh yeah, I guess we can finish watching the movie now. But it's really fun to just
Yes.
stop and just dive into the characters, especially if you've seen all the shows. She's watched all the shows and everything now, and to really just experience the universe with those characters, and then kind of go back and watch their stories again and go, oh well, hang on, now this connects to this, or uh because you've seen like that show, like Clone Wars enriches so much of, well, everybody's story, but Obi-Wan's as
Yes.
well, with Satine and everything. And yeah, you just get to add so much to it, and it's so much fun, doing the annual marathon and going through it, and just you know finding new ways to connect with the characters every single time.
Yeah. So are you going from one and going forward, or how are you doing it?
Yes. So uh I always go chronological. Um and I can remember uh in the early days of the internet, uh like early, early 2000s was, you're on like fandom message boards and stuff like that. We didn't have social media then,
Yeah.
so that was how
Yeah.
we talked to each other, and I remember there were people who were like adamant that, oh, you absolutely cannot go chronological order, you must go 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. And then there were other people who had like this, I think they called it the machete order, where it's
Yeah,
like,
I've
oh,
heard
you
about
have to
that.
preserve the twist of uh, Darth Vader being Luke's father, so you go 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 6. And I'm like, but if you've already seen it, you're not preserving the twist, you already know it,
Mm-hmm.
and most people, even if they haven't seen Star Wars, know that
Right.
twist. And I think there was a quote from George Lucas where he basically said, yeah, 1 to 6, that's how you do it. And that's how I always did it. So yeah, we do 1 to 9. um the What we watch in the marathons depends on, how much time we have, and what we feel like is most important. I used to try to throw in like at least one Clone Wars arc, and
Mm-hmm.
for a long time before Clone Wars came back and was finished and everything, I used to always throw in the arc. Um, I think it's called The Wrong Jedi. It's the one where Ahsoka is blamed for what
Mm-hmm.
Barriss did, and she's
Yeah.
on the run. And so I used to always throw that one in because I just thought that was a really powerful arc. And now obviously the go-to one is the Siege of Mandalore.
Yeah.
And we intercut that with Revenge of the Sith. So um, I've actually figured out the right order through looking up different people's opinions. When you pause the episode and jump over to Revenge of the Sith, and then you pause and you jump back over to Clone Wars, and um, like that's how I've watched Revenge of the Sith ever since
Oh, nice. I need to do
that
that.
final Clone Wars season came out. Yeah, and I haven't done Revenge of the Sith just by itself since then. So that to me is how you watch it now.
I
It's like a
love it.
4-hour experience, so you really
Yeah.
gotta, set some time aside. But it's really fun because you're jumping back between the two mediums, but then there's also those little bits of information where, like, there's Obi-Wan's like, well, I'm headed to Utapau, and he says it to Ahsoka.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just there's fun things like that make it worthwhile. We also throw in not all of Tales of the Jedi, but the Count Dooku episodes,
Mm-hmm.
just because they add so much to Dooku's backstory, and also I love Qui-Gon. And then after Revenge of the Sith, we do the Tales of the Jedi episode of Ahsoka post Revenge of the Sith.
Okay. Yeah.
And then Solo Rogue One, or no, Solo Obi-Wan
Uh-huh.
Rogue One, because we've decided that, okay, we can't watch every episode of every show every time we do this, but we're going to do Obi-Wan every single time. And then then the original trilogy, and then the sequels. So
That's awesome. You'll have to send me your watch order right now, and I'll have to post it for people if they want to check it out too and try it that way.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
that's really cool.
Yeah,
Crazy enough, I've never sat down and watched Star Wars in chronological order. I've always watched it release order.
Okay.
And I don't know why I have not done it the other way. I think it was because I was told for so long, like, you could only watch it the other way. And, like, I don't know, like, I'm already like, I am going to get made fun of so easily already liking Star Wars, from Star Wars fans, that I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to rock the boat, but I honestly like don't care anymore. And I have really wanted to do like a full chronological like storyline rewatch of everything, because I think I would really love it. And I have friends that have never watched Star Wars, or maybe have seen maybe a movie here and there or a piece of one, but didn't really pay attention. And then after me kind of like fully coming out as a Star Wars nerd and it not being like such a hidden secret that much anymore, and talking to people about it and why I love it. And it seems like different reasons have gotten different people interested in actually taking the time and watching all of them. And I want to have some like Star Wars watch parties like at my house and do either one movie a night or do like a weekend and knock out like a trilogy. And I was like, I know people are going to be against this, but I kind of want to start at the beginning.
Yeah, I think it's
Because
the way
it
to
can
go.
get confusing to people. It really can.
Sure.
And most people already know who Darth Vader is.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's ruining that anyway. So
yeah. And on the flip side of that, if they truly have not seen the movies, period, then there is a twist that you are protecting by showing the prequels first, and that is who Palpatine really is.
Yeah.
I mean, if you recognize Ian McDermott's voice and chin, then as soon as Darth Sidious comes on screen, I mean, there you go. But if somebody's not like, doesn't know, and they're not paying super close attention, they might be like, that Chancellor guy is a little shifty. I don't know.
Yeah.
So there's different things to preserve. And, I think whatever order you want to watch it in is cool. Star Wars means different things to different people. And if that means watching them in a different order, that's fine. But me, I'm all about chronological order, and for most movie series or TV series or things like that, if I do a rewatch, I'm going to do chronological order.
Yeah.
Because that's just I like watching a story unfold in order, and if it's a rewatch, then obviously I'm already familiar with it, and um, I like just going along with the characters in the order of
Yeah.
how everything happens to them.
Yeah. And I think it can get confusing for some people too. And
Mm-hmm.
like I know certain people, like certain personalities even, it might not hit as good if you
Yeah.
don't go in the order of the story, because it's just not as common for stories to be told so like kind of all over the place, because then you have the
Mm-hmm.
shows too, and if you don't have a solid base of the story chronologically, you're going to be confused as to where those TV shows fit into things.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah,
Uh,
it's a good thing, I think, for sure.
do you think that because I never really set out to memorize the timeline, I just kind of did, because like when I was a kid, I was like obsessed with, oh wow, so okay, Phantom Menace is 32 years before New Hope, and like I always just remember those numbers. I always remember how many years is between everything. And so do you think that's important too? Because I find that important to try to remember what year things take place. Because like my wife will ask me, wait, how many years has this been since then? And I'll be like, oh,
Yeah.
19.
Yeah.
And then I'm
So,
just like, not everybody knows that off the top of their head, but I think
yes,
it's very helpful.
I think it is very helpful. How my brain works, I can't memorize numbers very well. Like, period. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
what it is. Like it's in one ear, out the other. Like sometimes people need to tell me an important number and they're afraid because they're like, "Oh, you're gonna remember this." I'm like, "No, you don't understand. Like you'll tell me, I'll punch it in, and it's gone. Like, I
Yeah.
won't remember it." So, history dates were always very hard for me growing up
Mm.
to remember. So I definitely memorized the timeline and where things are. I sometimes will have to refresh my memory on the exact number or years sometimes. And I mean, that's nice because I can just pick up my phone and Google it. But it's not something that I have 100% memorized. But I do
Mm-hmm.
know roughly about the time frames between things, and then I know like the timeline of this is here, this is here, this is here. Now, like the exact number or the date, that's something that sometimes I remember and sometimes I don't remember. But I do think that is important too.
Yeah. And the event that anchors the years, that anchors the timeline, being the Battle of the
Yes.
Avon.
Yes.
I remember when I was uh talking to my wife about the timeline, I was saying something about like the years, and I was like, well, okay, hang on. First of all, like A New Hope is 0 BBY. Like that's, start with that, and then everything else makes sense. And then I was like, oh wait, do you know what BBY means? I hope she doesn't get mad at me for saying this, but she goes, before Baby Yoda.
I love it.
And I was like, no, but that's actually a really, really good guess.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, for many fans, it is before and after Baby Yoda.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And
yeah.
I kind of think too, like you were saying, different ways to watch things is more important to different people. Like it hits people differently and it has different meanings to different people. And I think too, like how you remember the order and the sequence of events, it might be more around a character that you love more than a specific battle or different things like it's technically supposed to be. So, I
Hmm.
mean, as long as you know the time, I don't know, like I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
it is important, but like I think people can love Star Wars and not always know all
Yeah.
of the things because it's impossible to know everything. Like it
It
really
is.
is.
Yeah. And you
Unless you just
can't,
have one of those memories
yeah, and you can't rewatch everything.
all
Like,
the
I
time.
mean, you can, but you got to really devote a certain amount. Like, if you're doing like an annual rewatch, that's going to be like a few months of your year every year. If you're going to do like every episode of every show, and that's the thing too, is that, with all the things that are out now, like, you can't. I mean, you can try to watch all of them in release order, but that's just going to be a big mess at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And chronological to me is so much easier. And then also, like, we're not going to watch Mando and Boba Fett on this rewatch, but if there was like a new season of either of those shows, and yeah, it's like go through all of Mando, go through all of
Yeah.
Boba Fett, and so some things are now very compartmentalized, I think. um there are definitely eras of Star Wars and like corners of the universe where you're like, okay, well, yeah, right now I'm gonna rewatch this show and this show because it
Mm-hmm.
relates to this show. But yeah, me personally, I'm not gonna watch every episode of everything every year because that's just
Yeah.
a lot of stuff.
It's a lot. It is a lot. And we're just going to get more. And one of the things I think I am excited about The Acolyte is that
Hmm.
I think anybody can watch it. So
Yeah.
even if you have friends that have never watched Star Wars, I really think it's something that they can come and watch. They don't need to know necessarily. I mean, that we might watch it and then be like, oh, just kidding. Like, you actually
Yeah.
need to know these
Yeah.
things. But from what it seems like it's something that someone could enter in Star Wars into and start from there. And that might
Hmm.
pique their interest into watching the movies and different things. And so that's kind of fun and exciting because I mean, I know when we've had different sequels come out, some of the kids are so young that, like, even if they had watched the previous ones, what they're going to remember more is their first Star Wars is going to be the sequels. And
Hmm.
so then it's kind of going back as they get older and watching, the prequels and the originals and different things. And then but it's going to be built more around that. And I don't know, I find that interesting how there's so many different like entry points that honestly people can take to get into Star Wars, and we all kind of think we all started at the same place, with A New Hope, and I think that's going to continue to change and look a little different for everybody. And I am really interested to see if I can find someone that didn't even get started with the movies and like read a book first or something. Like that would be so
I'm
fascinating to
sure.
me. And I'm sure
Yeah.
there's somebody out there that either read a book or a comic first and then thought, okay, now I'll watch a movie or something. I don't know. I'm sure there's somebody out there that's like that. So,
Hmm. Yeah. That'd be an interesting perspective to hear.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's definitely people who came on with the sequels. I mean, every time my wife and I are Disney Pass holders, and every time we're at Disney World in Hollywood Studios, there's at least one little girl dressed as Rey.
Yeah.
And I go to conventions a lot, and Rey is one of the most popular Star Wars cosplays, and
Yeah.
that really has been some people's jumping on point. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's why I'm always like, even if you don't like the movies, like if you were a prequels kid, remember what it felt like to be a prequels kid,
Hmm. Yeah.
and try not to just squash that for somebody else because
Yeah.
it's their entry point. And why wouldn't we want more people to love Star Wars? Like that's just so silly
Right.
to me to think that which thing you like more than the other makes you a better fan or not. Like
Yeah.
that just doesn't compute in my mind. So,
It's
but
all very silly, and I love the sequels. I love all Star Wars,
I do
and
too.
I do love the sequels, and the hate for them to me sounds exactly like it was for the prequels.
Hmm.
There's also this weird thing where some people try to now uh, erase the the history of hate for the prequels. They say, "Oh, but the prequels were always great. I always love the prequels." And I was like, "You pretending that the prequels weren't hated might help you argue against the sequels better, but we lived it. We remember it, okay?
Yes.
I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old, okay?
Yeah.
So I know exactly how this went. I remember, as recently as like 2017, I said something about being a prequel fan, and somebody told me, "Oh, you just lost all credibility."
Yeah.
And it's there's always been gatekeeping. There's always been like, you have to like things the way how I like them, or else I'm going to, you know, take your membership card away. You're not a
Mm-hmm.
real fan. And I think that anybody who ever uses the phrase like real fan or not a real fan, you're not being a real fan, because if you're trying to gatekeep, then you're missing the point. And I feel like I'm very passionate about that topic too, because I'm a filmmaker, and
Mm-hmm.
also I love movies and filmmaking in general. And there's kind of this broader idea, in the world of film, and people who, whether it's reviewers, or whether it's fans or filmmakers, or whatever, there's kind of this idea of, oh, like, well, that's a good movie, but it's not a good film, and I
Mm-hmm.
hate that kind of stuff, because I'm like, if it's all art and it's all subjective, and if it's not subjective and we act like we can quantify it, then it ceases to be art.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I might disagree with somebody's opinion, but if they like this movie more than that movie, you know, then that's valid. That's to them, that's valid. And I'm not going to sit there and tell them they're wrong. Um, Now, if they say that they hate a movie because, like, the kind of stuff they say about the sequels, oh, like Kathleen Kennedy ruined it, then yeah, I'm going to criticize that, because that's just stupid. So, it's just like, they're just coming up with ridiculous reasons that aren't actually based on filmmaking or storytelling, but they're based on like them taking their uh, perceptions of the world, and forcing it onto Star Wars, and saying, well, this didn't fit exactly what I want it to be, so therefore
Yeah.
it's an attack on me, and I'm going to attack it back, and I'm going to attack everybody who likes it. And it's just this whole messy thing. So I think we should resist the haters, but also remember why we love the things, and make sure that we get caught up in our own love for the things, and not always have the haters' voices echoing in our head. And this is a topic I can definitely ramble on, so I'm gonna put a
No,
pause on that now.
you're
But
good. I get it. And also too, like with the Kathleen Kennedy stuff, like I also don't feel like people know what producers do.
no, oh no, not at all.
And that's just something that I think is people just not knowing, because either they haven't researched it or they haven't worked in any capacity in film of some kind. I'm one of those people that I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt, maybe a little bit too much in some situations. But I'm like, well, I mean, if all you're hearing is one thing and you don't think to look it up yourself, I can see how it could be really easy for someone to assume like what somebody's job is in an industry that
Hmm.
they don't work in, or don't
Right.
really know that much about. But it's like, okay, that's not, all these things that people put on her. I'm like, that's not really her
Hmm.
job necessarily. Like, it's just one of those things that, and give people credit for the good things that they do too. Like, there's so many movies, even like outside of Star Wars, that if we're going to say it's all reliant on her, we wouldn't have
Hmm.
those movies then, if
Yeah,
she
I
wasn't a
I like
producer.
this.
So
I try not to engage period with the haters anymore, but what I
I
used to
know,
do is
me
I'd be
too.
like, have you ever heard of the movies E.T. or Jurassic Park? You heard of
Yeah.
those? Yeah, Kathleen Kennedy.
Yeah.
So, but
It's
also,
just
yeah,
it's just
it's
an
like you said,
awareness
giving
thing
credit.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, like you just said, giving credit, they will criticize her if they don't like something, but they don't give her credit if they do like something. And this is where I've really just this is kind of how I reach the point where I just, if I see the haters, I block them, I ignore them, I don't even engage anymore. Is Mando season 3? I actually saw somebody say, "Oh, well, season 1 and 2 were great. That was Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni at work. But season 3, I hate. Kathleen Kennedy must have her hands all over it." And I'm like, do you realize how ridiculous that sounds? Like, you are literally giving away the fact that she is just your scapegoat for when you don't like something.
I agree with you. If you don't like something or you don't like someone or you don't like decisions people are making, that is subjective. That is your right to have that opinion, whether it's based on fact or not. Like, I would rather have opinions based off of facts. But, like, if you're going to be that way, fine. But don't pull everybody in and think that we all have to have that same opinion or judge people or look down on people or whatever. Like, I'm like, that's fine. If you really want to have
Mm-hmm.
that opinion, I'm not going to die on a hill arguing with you over it. It's not worth my time. It's not worth my energy, but leave
Yeah.
everybody else alone. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if somebody else likes something or whatever, just let them like it. Move on with your life. If you really hate it that much, find something else. Like,
Yeah,
that's,
it's like you really pay a lot of attention to it for something that you claim to hate so much.
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, and I think it is, a lot of with men like that. I think it is because she's a woman and they're being sexist. But it's also and I know I said I don't want to dwell on the haters too much, but I
Yeah.
think it's
Yeah.
also good
Same.
to talk about it so that we can like dismantle the silly things they say and remind people that it's okay to love these things, because I think sometimes the hate like echoes in your brain and you have
And
to learn to like to shove all that aside and go, you know what, I love this thing and I'm
yeah.
going to enjoy this thing.
Yeah, and I feel like I always have to say, I'm not saying that you have to, like, I love all the Star Wars things. I do not expect everybody else to love all the Star Wars things. And you saying I don't like this or I don't like how this was done or this wasn't my favorite or whatever, that's not being hateful. It's okay to criticize things in a respectful way. It is okay to
Hmm.
have your opinions. I think the problem is when you turn it into a overarching almost moral issue that everyone
Yeah.
has to have this opinion and it's not just your opinion. If people online could just add in my opinion to
Yeah.
the end of things, and I know I've said that on here a lot, like, it could be a better discussion. And so I'm not trying to say people need to be almost on the other side and just be toxic positive and love everything that someone does and never have an issue with it. I don't think that's what either one of us are saying, but like, just be nice and respectful
Hmm.
about it. Like, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing situation.
Exactly. That's what it is for a lot of people's all or nothing, and it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
And I think a
Yeah.
good thing to remember that I always like to think about is that George Lucas picked Kathleen Kennedy, and he said, I would not have sold it if she wasn't going to be in charge. He'd known her for 30 years and
Yeah.
at that point, and you know, he knew who he was picking. He knew what he was doing. And, there's also this narrative that, oh, but then they threw out all of his ideas. It's like, no, a lot of his ideas are still in the sequel trilogy. A young girl on a desert planet, that was his idea. Luke being secluded somewhere on an island, that was his idea. Like, there's, like the art books and stuff like that have all these drawings and these stories in there. We can find these facts and know that actually George Lucas's ideas are intact. Not all of them, sure,
Yeah.
because it's a new generation of filmmakers, but you know, he knew who he was picking and he did it willingly and happily. He wanted these stories to continue on after him, and some of his ideas did indeed make it into the sequel trilogy.
Yeah. And did watching Star Wars and everything that, George Lucas did do and how he did champion people and inspire another generation to be creative and work in Star Wars, did that inspire you to become a filmmaker and do what you do?
Yeah, I would say there are three filmmakers without whose work I don't know if I would be a filmmaker. I don't think I would be a filmmaker. And that is George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Peter Jackson. Um, Largely because of Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, and Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I watch those movies, when I engage with um, those stories, that reminds me why I love storytelling. Because I've always loved storytelling. I somewhere as a kid I realized that every time I played with my action figures that I wasn't just like having them punch each other. I was coming up with elaborate plots for why these characters were facing each other. And I don't know, I don't remember exactly what age I was, but I somewhere I was like, I'm coming up with stories every time I do this, and yes, somewhere along the line, I just realized I love storytelling. I love creating stories, and filmmaking just happens to be my favorite outlet for it. But yeah, without those filmmakers, I would not be a filmmaker. And George Lucas was definitely one of the first people I was aware of as like I knew his name as, oh, this is a guy who makes movies.
Mm-hmm.
Probably George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were the first two people that I was aware of their names being behind these movies. And Lucas, not only did he create this whole world that we love and everything, and like it's literally all of it exists because of him. But if you look at it from behind the scenes aspect, the kind of stuff he had to do to get the first Star Wars film made, uh, he went through so much, and it truly was like a passion project that he did not give up on. And the fact that he got Star Wars made, I think that's a inspiring story to any filmmaker who wants to get anything made. And you know the stuff that happened, like the whole sandstorm in Tunisia and everything like that on the set of A New Hope, that damaged some things, is just everything they went through on that film. Uh, and made it through and finished the film is just so inspiring to me, especially that it has led to it's led to us talking right now. It's led to so many things for so many people. And um yeah, that it all just began with one man going, you know what, I'm gonna finish my story. I'm going to tell my story that I've come up with, that I'm trying to film, that I'm trying to put out. you know it's something that maybe we take for granted now. We're just like, oh yeah, George Lucas created Star Wars, and good for him. But if you really do a deep dive, like this was not an easy thing for him to do. And it really is inspiring to me to look at his work, not just him as a uh, storyteller and a filmmaker, but just how he kind of stuck with it and how he persevered to make these movies. And I honestly don't know where I would be without Star Wars,
Yeah.
and it's something that I will forever cherish all of the contributions to film that George Lucas has made. Um, and I think that many of us who are in, artistic fields would not be where we are without Star Wars.
Yeah. It's very, very inspiring. And I think it's also really cool how he was so open about how they did it and the team of people that it took to make it happen. Like, he seemed to be very open about, I have this great team of people that's doing effects, or I have these people that are acting, or, he
Hmm.
didn't just take all the credit
Oh
too.
yeah,
I mean, I know he came back and did the prequels and he's like, I want to do this, like
yeah,
I
yeah,
want to
for
do it
sure.
all. But
Yeah.
like, I mean, he had earned that. Not that he didn't in the beginning, but like, if anybody could be like, no, I want to do 3 movies, it's like, yes, yes, George Lucas, you can,
Hmm. Yeah.
But I, it was such a risk. And I think I remember the story that, he picked the story of A New Hope because, people thought it was going to fail. People didn't think it was going to be successful. And,
Hmm.
to him, it had the best beginning, middle, and end of a story. If it just ended up being one movie, that he would be somewhat satisfied with, okay, this is the only one I got to do, but at least it's, has some kind of an ending and that sort of
Right.
thing. And so I find that really interesting too, that that's why it started where it did. Um, and just his genius of pushing technology forward and trying new things, and also the action figures. Like, nobody else had did a deal like he did with getting, the royalties or the trademark, or I'm going to say the wrong
Yeah.
term, but he was getting the money from that, and
Yeah.
everybody thought he was
The
crazy.
merchandising deal.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
merchandising. Yeah,
Yeah.
like, that was just, you didn't do that. No one cared about the toys or the action figures or that sort of thing, and then it just turned into,
Hmm.
everybody wanted them. And I don't know, like, he's just seems like a very, very intelligent person that also still knows the value of inspiring another generation and turning things over to them and not
Hmm.
holding on to everything for himself, which I think we see through the stories, like we talked about with Obi-Wan too, like,
Hmm.
he mentored Luke, and then it was Luke's journey to move forward with the Jedi and the Force and that legacy. So it's just it's really interesting to see how life and art kind of imitating itself, and kind of coming back to like what you were saying, the poetry. It goes beyond just, I think, even the stories in Star Wars. It like you said, like, we wouldn't be sitting here talking if it
Yeah.
wasn't for him creating those movies. And
Hmm.
the stories of Star Wars also, I know, have helped me and a lot of other people through our hard times, just like seeing characters like Obi-Wan and Luke and everybody else deal with hard things and how they keep going forward. I know for me, one of my safest places has been Star Wars, and something that I can come back to for comfort, and just like a friend that's always going to be there is Star Wars. And has it been like that for you as well?
Yeah. And that's awesome. By the way, that's awesome that you feel you have that place with Star Wars.
Yeah. Oh,
I
thanks.
love hearing stories like, yeah, no, I love hearing stories like that.
Yeah.
Um, and I realize we're like well into this now, but thank you also for just doing this whole podcast. I think it's
Yeah,
a
of
really great thing
course.
to just have Star Wars fans connect with each other's stories.
Yeah.
And now I've forgotten the question. So
Oh, no, you're good. I was
yeah.
just asking if, for me, it's helped me not only inspire me, like, it has with you, with, Lucas's legacy and the characters, but also turning that around. And when I've gone through like a hard time, and I know it's been the same for other people too, like, especially for me, even being more specific, with my mental health journey and dealing with like anxiety and depression and different things like that, Star Wars is something that I've always been able to go back to. Um, I can think specifically like the Clone Wars show was like my comfort show for several years when I was going through a really dark time in my life. And that's when I fell in love with Ahsoka. And Ahsoka was such a big character for me to help inspire me to keep going and move forward when things are hard, and how sometimes you have to let go of things in the past, but still hold on to like who you are as a person and take that to move forward to kind of find like your own path and different things like that. Just kind of an example, but that's kind of more than what you asked me. But
Yeah. No, that's
just kind
fine.
of like I don't know if it's been that way for you too, and how it's been that way for you.
Yeah. Uh, well, I definitely find the stories to be inspiring. That's one of the things I love about storytelling is that it can do more than just tell a story. It can
Mm-hmm.
connect with you. It can share a lesson. It can be something that uh, you end up like valuing and coming back to and being like, I'm going to try to apply that to my life. Um, and for me, it's very important with my mental health journey. I have obsessive compulsive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. Um, I've had them for as long as I can remember since I was a kid, but they got worse when I was a teenager. Probably I think about 13, 14 is when it started to get worse, and I didn't know what it was that I had
Mm-hmm.
until I was in college.
Yeah.
Um, there was a specific psychology professor that I had who he himself has the same two disorders I do. And through him talking about it and then me looking it up, I'm like, this is what I go through. And to discover that it had a name
Mm-hmm.
and that it was something that could be explained was a huge weight off me. Because it used to be something that was very lonely and very like, am I the only one who experiences this? Does anyone else feel like this? And then you're scared to ask anyone else if they feel that way, because if they say no, then you're like, oh, how do I look now? Am I a crazy person? And I usually don't even like to use the word crazy just because of the
Yeah.
connotations it gives, but that's how it would feel,
Yeah, that's your
back
fear
then.
for sure. I get that
Yeah,
100%.
yeah. So it's very lonely. It's very isolating, and I think anything that you can connect with and be close to, something that becomes familiar to you, something that um, makes you happy just to watch it or read it or listen to it. Um, those are very, very important things. And ultimately, what it is art, and this is
Mhm.
why, art is so important. And it's like, parents, please let your kids do art and, encourage them in doing their art, because the world needs art. And, you know, th- with something like Star Wars, I don't think I even realized it as a kid that I was finding comfort in it. When you're a kid, you're just watching it and you're like, oh, I'm enjoying watching this. And then as you get older, you start to go, you know what? This is something that's always been with me. And it's something that really touches me and comforts me. And, I don't think I could list all of the ways that it's helped me along my own journey. Um, and to look at characters like Obi-Wan and Luke and Ahsoka, and to see them go through these moments where, especially Ahsoka, she is one of my favorite characters, and she's my wife's favorite character. Um, but Ahsoka literally has uh, everything that she knows, everything she believes in, turns against her. It all comes crashing down, and basically the Jedi Council, the people in her life that, have been the ultimate source of wisdom and lessons and everything, say, we think you're guilty of this crime.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have faith in her in that moment, and she loses faith in the whole Jedi Order. And of course, we know that, she leaves, and for the rest of her life, as far as we've seen and we know, she does not identify as a Jedi anymore. And um looking at characters like that just, it might be in these fantasy worlds with, you know mystical powers and laser swords and space battles, but it's just very human, like you were kind of
Mm-hmm.
saying earlier with Obi-Wan. They're very human experiences. And something I learned in one of my communications classes in college, I think, was that, you know when you are being creative, whatever you create has some of you in it. So these might be, fantastical worlds with aliens and everything else, but it was all created by humans. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's going to have human emotions. It's going to have human experiences. And, I have been on quite a wild ride with my own mental health journey. Um, but it's something where I can't look at it as uh something that has like a finishing point. Like it doesn't, there is no finish line. There is no, okay, I'll do this much and then I'll be better. It's a daily thing, and it's something that um I have to, you know, continue to work against. Something I have to, I have to continue my fight every day. And
Yeah.
there's plenty of characters and storylines in Star Wars that reflect that kind of thinking. And it is just very, very inspiring to me. And again, Obi-Wan is somebody I come back to because he had every reason in the world to give up and to not believe, and he just kept doing it. He kept moving forward, and I think that's what you got to do. And I think there are plenty of characters and stories, like I said, that uh, people can identify with and carry with them to help them on their own journey through life.
Yeah. I think that is definitely something that's like almost like unique to Star Wars a little bit, because in a lot of the other blockbuster movies or whatever, like there's heroes, and sometimes heroes are portrayed as heroes. They don't really have a lot of weaknesses. They might not be human. And so their interactions with humans is part of the story of how they deal with that, because they're otherworldly, they're perfect, they're super strong, and all this different things. And
Yeah,
in Star Wars, I mean, yes, there's a Jedi that do have special powers, but they're still human. All the characters we see, they still have the same kind of struggles that we have. And I'm drawn to anything that's very raw and like open and vulnerable, and doesn't like try to make something look prettier than it needs to be, if that makes sense. With music, I'm drawn to more artists that are more raw and vulnerable, and share what they have going on in their life, like especially if it has to do with mental health, because that's something that I've struggled with for a very long time. And
hmm
so to see Star Wars and to see these characters, and like you were saying, like with Ahsoka, like her to keep going, like she had to make some changes, I think, to protect herself, but
hmm
she kept going, and it looked a little bit different than how Obi-Wan kept going. And it doesn't make Ahsoka less of a good character or a good um, story to emulate or try to be like because she left the Jedi and Obi-Wan didn't. It's just a different story. It's a different path. And I love how Star Wars tells that because I think in this world sometimes we can get stuck on this is the path that people need to take. And I know what's better for everybody. And this is what they need to do. And our paths aren't linear. They go up and down and around and my journey is going to look different than yours and it's going to look different than someone else. And we might end up in the same place, but getting there is going to be very different. And so I love that they show these characters that are fighting for the light or some that even succumb to the dark and then come back to the light, how they end up in the same place. I love that because you don't see that very much. And you don't see very much in stories and in real life where someone can fall as hard as you can in Star Wars and you can still be redeemed and you can still be welcomed back to the light. And that just doesn't really happen in real life. And so I love that Star Wars does that. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's one of the reasons why it's my favorite thing like ever.
Yeah, it's a very special thing. And even we were actually watching Revenge of the Sith this evening, and well, the Revenge of the Sith Clone Wars mix.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that Anakin, even though obviously he goes to the dark side and he ends up coming to the wrong conclusions and doing the wrong actions, everything that leads up to it, you kind of feel for him because he's really being put in a difficult spot where, um, Palpatine's pulling his strings, and then the Jedi Counselor saying, "Hey, do this, do that," and then even like with Padme, when she says, uh, you know, ask the Chancellor to stop the fighting, and Padme doesn't realize that, the Jedi literally just said, "Oh, hey, ask the Chancellor this, do this with the Chancellor," that she's essentially doing the same thing that the Jedi did, even though she has a much purer intention. And Anakin like snaps at her and says, "Don't tell me to do that." Um, and it is interesting to me that the Jedi, and I think Clone Wars definitely makes this apparent, the Jedi were failing.
Mhm.
Everything that Luke says about them in Last Jedi is true. In their hubris, they allowed Darth Sidious to rise and destroy them. The Jedi were making all kinds of mistakes, and what happened with Ahsoka. I think fighting in the Clone War in general, like Qui-Gon would never have fought in the war, and Qui-Gon's the one who probably had the best grasp of what the Jedi should be, and the Jedi weren't that. At least not in the time of the prequels.
Yeah.
And so all of that is on Anakin. All of that is weighing on Anakin, where he's trying to do his best, and the quote unquote good guys are messing up, making mistakes, and really being unfair to him. And all the while he's got a war going on, and he's having dreams of his wife dying, and all of this stuff is weighing on him. And so again, while he comes to the wrong outcome, you can feel for him during that time, because you're like, wow, like I've been in moments where like everything weighs on me. I feel like I'm being pulled in 100 different directions, and you can just see it in his story, and it is great that he eventually does get redemption. Like you said, it is a galaxy where people can come back to the light, and however long it takes them, and whatever they've been through, um and to watch moments like that, like Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, Um, I understand that, uh, again, pre dark side stuff, but I understand, like, like just having that much weigh on you, and maybe not knowing who you can trust, even amongst the people that you're closest to. That's very real life stuff, and I love that we get to find things like that in these characters.
Yeah. And I think it's very humbling too, because I think so many times too, like, we can get kind of full of ourselves and we think, I would never do X, Y, and Z, or how could these people do this? Or why couldn't they do it the right way? Or,
Mm-hmm.
with whatever it applies to. And sometimes you have to think about it and think, okay, would you really not do anything at certain points? Like, I know there's a line, and I'm not saying like all the bad
Mm-hmm.
things, but like, for your family or for someone that you love, what lengths would you not go to if you were really put in that corner and you were really being stretched at that point? And even if, yes, at the end of the day, you would not do bad things to get to that place, you're still kind of think about it,
Mm-hmm.
or how can I go about this? Like, I mean, if your family is hurting and starving, like, what would you do to feed them? If someone you love is dying, what would you do to bring them back? Like, we are not better than these characters that make these mistakes and do things for, in their mind, it seems like the right reasons, but it's not. Like, we all can get to that point. And I think sometimes we can get to a place where we just think we know everything, and we think, I would never do fill in the blank. But maybe you wouldn't now, but what if you lost everything? Or what if your life looked different? Or what if you weren't in the place that you are and your situations looked more like someone else? Like, I think it also reminds us of our humanity and the fact that we struggle and we go through hard things. And just because, Obi-Wan didn't get tempted doesn't necessarily make him better than Anakin. At the end of the day, he didn't think Anakin could come back to the light.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
he didn't do all the horrible, violent things that Anakin did, but he still didn't fully believe in somebody either. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know, it's like such an interesting study on humans and humanity. And I love how intentional George Lucas was in that, and how he used even things like psychology to look at archetypes of people, and how we try to fulfill things, or how we try to live our lives. And it's so interesting to me. And I think that's another reason why, like, it's been something that I can go to in dark times, because I don't feel, kind of like what you were saying, like, are people going to think I'm crazy? Right?
Mm-hmm.
When we have those dark times and we have those dark moments, and we don't know what side of it we're going to come out of, you can go to Star Wars and you can see that other people struggled and then how they handled it. And then that in turn has given me inspiration to keep going. And um, I just think that's a beautiful thing about Star Wars. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to really talk to people, this month specifically, that we're wanting to talk about their mental health, and we're wanting to talk about that journey, because it is Mental Health Awareness Month. And I just think the more people that talk about it, the more people will understand that they're not alone, and that there are people out there who struggle with different things, whatever long list of things it is, because everybody has something different. And even if two people both have anxiety, it might look a little different than the
Mm-hmm.
the other person. And so it was just really important to me to talk about these things, especially this month, because I don't I don't want anybody to feel alone, and I don't want anybody to feel like they have to then continue to struggle alone after they find out that somebody else has gone through something similar. And
Mm-hmm.
also, as someone who figured out what their diagnosis was later in life, that it's never too late to figure those things out about yourself. And,
Yeah.
like you were saying, how it felt so like, aha, I get it. Like this makes sense. I mean, that's how it felt when I discovered that I had ADHD. Like I always felt like you were saying, like there was something else going on or something different about how my brain worked or how I process things. And I thought I was crazy for a while. Like I didn't understand why I was depressed. I didn't understand why I had anxiety because on paper, my life, if people were looking at it, would go, why? You can't be depressed. You shouldn't have anxiety. What do you have bad in your life? And not that that justifies it. I think you can have a perfect life and still have,
Sure. Yeah.
anxiety and depression because it can just be clinical and it can just be, your brain just doesn't work like everybody else's. And that has
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with your circumstances. But it like you, it was a nice moment of going, oh, okay,
Mm-hmm.
things make sense. And I understand myself a little bit better now.
Yeah. No, it is. I think it is a beautiful thing to um get to share, your mental health journey, and to have people understand it, and just kind of try to be with you where you're at. And they might not understand it. They might be very, very confused by it. And so, I try not to ask people to be like, I don't need you to understand everything. I still don't understand everything about it,
Hmm.
but I need you to come from a place of wanting to understand and wanting to be supportive. And like you said, some people saying like, oh well, you can't be depressed, you can't have this. I've had people say like, I tell them I have OCD, and they go, oh, I got a little bit of that. And I'm like, well, you probably don't, because you wouldn't describe it that way,
Yeah.
and or especially with OCD, people say like, oh, I've really got to have like my shelves, everything in order, everything nice and tidy. I'm like, okay, that that can be like a symptom of it, but unless you're doing your shelves nice and tidy because you think something horrible will happen if you don't,
Hmm.
then you don't actually have OCD.
Yeah.
And
People don't
so
understand, I don't think.
no, yeah, no, they don't. And that's what I think is really great about things like what you're doing here. And really, anytime there can be representation of mental health, anytime that there's an open forum to talk about it, there's a safe space to talk about it. Um, anytime that happens, it is a good thing, because uh, as far as we've come with understanding mental health and talking about mental health, there is still a long way to go.
Hmm.
And anything that we can do to get our stories out, I think is very important. Like I've worked some of my mental health journey into some of my short films. Um, but also just, like conversations with a person one on one. As long as they're willing to listen and they're willing to learn, um, I'll talk to them, about all the details of what I go through.
Yeah.
Um, that being said, I also have experiences with people that were not understanding. I've had multiple friends who are no longer my friends
Hmm.
because they basically, heard what I had to say and threw it in my face, and was like, oh, like, you're just being lazy or whatever else. And so I do feel like I often end up in this place where um I I'm constantly wanting to share my mental health journey with everybody, and I'm also constantly afraid of sharing it because of
Yeah.
how they might react. And so that is uh, a really rough place to be stuck in. And you know, I deal with it all the time, and I even as I'm sharing about my mental health journey, like honestly, even right now, it's like, okay, how are certain people going to receive this? You know, how are people going to think about it, or you know, what are they going to think about me, or how they're going to compare their own journey to mine? And it can be very daunting, and it can be
Mm-hmm.
very discouraging, but um, I have to remind myself that uh, sharing it is important, that you know, moments like these are important, and that you know, we need to take these opportunities to talk about it, because uh, if one person listens to this episode and something that I said helps them on their journey, if just that happens to one person, then to me it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think in all areas of life, with everybody from every background, we need to be understanding, and we need to be willing to listen to their story. And mental health is something that is not on the surface. It's something that's harder to see, if you can see it at all. Um, so it's harder to get it out there, but you know, we're trying to do it, and we have to keep trying to do it. And um, so yeah, I know I said it already, but I just think things like what you're doing here are very important, because um, there are going to be many people that were like you or I before we found out our diagnosis, you know, where they're lost in their own heads and they're confused as to what's going on. They don't know if they can talk to anybody about it. And the first time you hear somebody talk about it, that can, you know, make all the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I want to validate 100% how you feel about sharing that with people, because it is very scary, and it is it's a very unsure place, because you don't know how that person is going to receive it and what they're going to use it for. Like, are they going to use it to help you and be your friend, or are they going to use it against you when
Right.
you're having a hard time? And I've been there too, and it really sucks. And I think talking to people about mental health, and also knowing where I've been with that journey, also helps me try to be a little bit more understanding, even when, back to people hating things, are very vocal in a very negative way. Because I know that when I've been in my darkest and worst places, and I felt isolated and I felt very alone, the easiest thing to do was to attach to an opinion or a person or an ideology, and then yell at people for that because you're mad. And sometimes that anger isn't even about a movie or about
Mm-hmm.
someone's opinion or whatever. It's something internalized that you don't even know what's going on. And while I think it is good to have healthy boundaries, and if that means not having someone in your life anymore, or blocking someone on social media, or whatever steps those are that you need to take for your mental health, to do that. But I also try to remember that a lot of times people, where they're coming from, it has nothing to do with me at all.
Yeah.
And I know that I have reacted out of a hurt place before too. And so, even though it's unhealthy and it's not logical and it doesn't make sense, but I try to remember, just like with the characters in Star Wars, that we all kind of have our backstories.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not always in the healthiest place, and sometimes some of us being open about the struggles and the things that we go through might help somebody else, like you're saying, even if it's just one person, be able to know that they're not alone, or maybe they hear something that they can resonate with and they're like, oh, that might be something that I'm actually dealing with. Maybe I should look into that, or maybe I should reach out to a friend or a loved one or someone else that's saying they're going through that, or maybe I seek professional help. Like whatever that is, that makes me happy and is worth the risk to me of, being judged. I know there's a lot of judgment about taking medicine in certain circles, or how you
Yeah.
deal with your mental health, or going to therapy. And um I'm learning that it's even weirder because, like, I was on antidepressants and anti-anxiety. I mean, like, they thought I was bipolar before they even thought that I could have ADHD. That's how crazy, you know, it
Yeah.
is, especially for me and what I went through. And I feel like it's almost more hush hush, and almost more like people are almost more judgmental for you to be on like Adderall or something for ADHD than an antidepressant or anti-anxiety. And at this point, after the years I've gone through this, I don't even care.
No, yeah,
But,
yeah.
if I was younger and I didn't understand the science and how it helps work and different things like that, like I would have struggled with it. And it would have been hard. It would have been hard to people to say that you're on drugs, or you're going to turn into a drug addict if you take that, or
Hmm.
whatever people are yelling at kids these days. And, I don't want people to feel alone. And like you said, and I don't want people to feel like they have to go through whatever it is by themselves, because some of us have been there. And you know the best we can do is try to make it a little better, maybe for the next person.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's you know, I think it's something that we don't have to worry uh too much about. Because like I'll be like, oh, am I getting my story out there? Like, have I said the right things? It's like, just talk about it. Like, don't worry
Yeah.
about saying the right things. Just talk about it, and I guarantee you that you're getting it out there. Your words are getting across.
Yeah.
And I do want to touch on what you said about medication, because I take medication, and it that is one of, still to this day, one of the most misunderstood things. You'll find people who, they seem to be very well read on mental health. They seem to understand what you're going through. They seem to um, you know be understanding in every way you can imagine. But then they'll say, oh, but you should really, try something more natural
Mhm.
instead of medication. And I just feel like, you're discounting my experience. I understand you might have an experience with medication. Maybe it's very negative. Maybe somebody that negative was negatively affected by medication. But this is my journey.
Mhm.
I know what it's done for me. I know how it's improved my life. And for you to sit there and basically say that doesn't count, that doesn't matter, it's it's the same as saying that, oh, your mental illness isn't real.
Yeah.
So that is one of the things that I'm talking about when I say we have a long way to go. I think we have a long way to go as far as how people perceive medication, and talk about it, and how we treat people who are on medication. And again, hopefully every little bit that we share will help to decrease the stigma, and help to get people to a place where they go, you know what, like, I need to put my opinion aside and listen to what this person has to say about their journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that can be hard too, because like I've had that conversation with people too, and I've had to say, "Look, I'm still alive, so I'm gonna keep taking my medication,"
Hmm.
you know? And,
Yeah.
I think if there's people out there that are, like, nervous or hesitant or aren't sure what they think about it, no, it is not 100% the only way you have to go to treat something. Yes, there are natural ways that you can do. I've tried them for things. They work for some people, and some people they don't work for. Um,
Hmm.
and just because you take a medication doesn't necessarily, depending on what you have, mean that you have to take that forever. It if you don't like it when you're on it, you don't have to keep taking it. And so I think that's the thing that I struggled with the most mentally on the mental health journey, was thinking I had to be on a medication for the rest of my life and that there was something wrong with me that I couldn't fix for myself. That was so hard for me to get over. And
Hmm.
I had to realize, like, would I be saying this to somebody that was diabetic and they had to take insulin every day? No, I would not. I would not be
Right.
saying, well, your body isn't strong enough and what's wrong with you? I wouldn't do that. And so, while yes, I think there are some great natural ways to help deal with these things. And I don't want to discount that. And yes, there are bad doctors, that
Yeah.
overprescribe and that sort of thing. But I don't think that just because those are true means that it's bad for somebody, to
Hmm.
find what works for them. And for me, that's been taking medicine. And for you, it sounds like it's the same. So,
Hmm.
don't get on people that are already struggling and are having a hard time and already struggle with feeling like they might be crazy or feel like they're not normal, feeling alone, feeling like you're not as strong as somebody else.
Yeah.
Don't get in their face maybe about that, no matter what your opinions
Hmm.
are, because that's not helping anything. Maybe just
Yeah.
listen to that person first,
Yeah.
like you're saying.
Always just listen. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just
Because
come from a
it's
place where you're very open-minded and you want
yeah.
to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, and that's why when someone even throws out something crazy that I've never heard of before, I listen to it, because, like, I try to understand that someone's trying to come from a good place, and maybe there's something that I haven't thought about. And, sometimes there are new things that come up, or different things like that that can help. It might not be the end all be all for something, but if that helps you, great. And that's the thing that I always tell people when they ask me about medication or they ask me about my journey with medication. I always say, look, this is what worked for me. It doesn't mean it's going to work for you. It Everybody's biology is a little bit different. So just because something worked for me doesn't mean that this is the best course of action for you. Like, let's say someone has ADHD and they want to deal with it naturally and they don't want to take any medication. That takes so much planning and so much dedication and a complete lifestyle change of how you live your life.
Hmm.
Yes, it probably in some cases, not in every case, but in some cases, I'm sure, yes, it can be done and people do function without it. I don't have the time or the patience, like, or the mental capacity to live my life that way. And so if you want to say I'm taking a shortcut, fine. I really don't care.
Yeah.
At this point. But for what works for me in my life and all of that, this is what's working right now. It doesn't mean maybe 5 years down the road, something else might not work. And
Yeah.
also, none of us are saying you take a pill and you're fine. I'm still not
Yeah.
fine. You know,
Yeah.
you have to do a lot of self-work, whether it's therapy or different things. There's a lot of things that you have to add to that. It's not you take this and you're magically better,
Hmm.
even though that would be nice, but it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And therapy is, I think, very important. I think everybody should seek out therapy. It doesn't matter if you have a mental illness or what.
Yes.
You have no idea how much it will improve your quality of life once you really start to get into it. Once you start to unpack things, because we've all got stuff. We've all got
Yeah.
stuff that weighs on us, and things in our past that affect us that we don't even realize. And so I think that's very, very important. But especially, with mental illness, because you can read about it, and you can look at your own journey, but sometimes you still need somebody else on the outside to look at it and help you connect the dots and help you go, okay, well, see, here's where this comes in. Here's where that problem is affecting you the most. And it's something that I think is just as valuable as medication, and it really is about finding what works for you. You might not be the right medication the first time. It might not be the right amount. It might not be the right doctor. I think you have to you you're seeking out the opinions of experts, but you also know yourself. You know what you're going through. And so, like, when I had a doctor who was putting me on a very, very low dose, and I knew it wasn't helping me, and I asked him, can we raise it? And he goes, no, we're not going to raise it. And I listened to him, and I suffered for it for a few years until I switched to somebody else, and they were like, oh yeah, no, you should be for your height and weight, and you should be on a much bigger dose. And now I'm so much better off, than I was then. And I think about, like, wow, I spent 3 years listening to that guy, and I could have been where I am now.
Yeah.
But it's a balance. Listen to the experts, seek them out, but you also know your own journey. You know what you're going through. And if you feel like what you're sharing with somebody is not being received, even if they're, an expert, a professional, then maybe it's time to find somebody else, because we do need the help, but we also need to feel comfortable about it. We need to feel like we're being heard and we're being helped in the way that we should be. Like you said, you had a wrong diagnosis for a while there, and it is a tough thing to navigate. But I think it's very important to go through all those steps and find what works for you, and what combination works, and what you feel comfortable with, and just try to take the steps that you need to take, and also to know that it's not an instant fix. It might, and really, there, for mental illness, there is no permanent fix. And just to know that it's, like I said before, like a daily struggle. You have to make sure that you are standing up to it every day, and don't get discouraged if today is a bad day. You're going to have bad days. But you will get on the other side of whatever this moment is, and a moment like this is going to come up again. But don't get discouraged by that, because that's just the nature of the thing. And again, therapy, medication, sharing it in places like this, all of those are good steps. And with this being a daily thing, having all of these different forms of help and these different outlets and stuff like that, I think are very important, because it just helps us. If it is a daily thing for you, then every little bit helps, and every little bit sticks with you, and just helps you continue on, continue moving forward.
Yeah. And I also try to look at it as instead of a diagnosis being being negative or a label or something like that, I look at it as just information about myself and my brain. And then I can either take that and I can use that to make my life better, or I can take that and not do anything with it. And, I'm going to have a lot more challenges than if I
Yeah.
took it and used it as good information to try to make my life and the life of those around me better. So,
Hmm.
it's hard. And yeah, I want to echo what you said too about like finding the right person. Like, I have an amazing husband who probably could give me some of the same advice that a therapist would give me, and I love him. But I probably am going to listen to the therapist, and like my dad's a therapist and he's helped me out a lot too, but that still doesn't take the place of having somebody that, you can talk to, and that e- even if, like you were saying, it's not necessarily that you have a mental illness, but you might have something going on in life. I think, just like you said, anybody can benefit from that. Having a sounding board that you can bounce things off of, that is a third party outside of your life, that doesn't have any emotions tied to any of the people or different things like that, it is so helpful.
Hmm.
um and I say that as somebody who is like in between trying to find a new therapist, and I think that is one of the hardest things to do as somebody who
Very
is
hard.
going through any kind of mental health journey. Is like you're saying, I've stayed with a doctor too long. I think we've all done that, or a therapist, or different things, because I think, at least for me, with what I've gone through, it has affected my self-worth a lot. And
Hmm.
so learning to advocate for yourself is such a hard thing when you're struggling with your self-worth. And it's hard to try to find somebody that you think you deserve and is listening to you when you almost don't even feel like on certain days that you even deserve that. And so that can be such a hard thing, but it's something that I'm so glad that I've learned through this, because now I know that I also have chronic migraine. And so advocating for myself through that has been such an easier process because of my mental health journey and learning how to do that through that.
Hmm.
So, at least there's a little bit of a silver lining, I guess. I'm like, well, I'm doing a little bit better with this situation because I learned from past situations. But it's
Hmm.
it's a hard thing.
It is. It definitely is. And
Yeah.
I think I'm 35, and I feel like some of the most valuable lessons I've learned in my life have come just in the last couple of years. And one of those things is, like, be honest with yourself about how you feel about something, like what you believe about it, what you think about it, how you feel about it. Be honest with yourself, because that is a huge step in doing what you need to do.
Yeah.
Like if you need to do something about your mental health, be honest with yourself and be like, okay, I recognize that I'm going through this, I need help with this. um because then once you've gotten over that hurdle, then you can go, okay, what's the next step? What do I do next?
Yeah. Definitely. And I know we both said this, but it's like it's never too late. I mean, everything with me started to really show its head when I was like 18, and I'm 34. I'll be 35 later this year. And I think I finally got the right diagnosis. Like, I think it's been like 2 years now. And I've listened to podcasts about people, like ADHD podcasts, and that's been really helpful for me. And there was a lady on one of them, and she got a diagnosis at 50 something, and she's now in her 70s. And
Wow.
she started a foundation. And one of her main things is, it is never too late. Like, so many people think, well, I'm this age, I've made it this far, why would I get help on this now? And she's like, you're always worthy of learning more about yourself. And that
Hmm.
just really stuck with me. And I just think that's such good advice that, like, I was saying earlier, don't look at it as a negative, like a label or a diagnosis even. Just look at it as learning more information about yourself, and that everybody, regardless of how old you are, where you are, everyone is worthy of learning that information. And that really resonated with me and stuck with me and gave me hope that if somebody at that age can feel that way and has done so much for the community that has ADHD, that like I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's very important. I think that uh that you kind of touched on that there, where I think sometimes we feel like, oh, I'm past the age where it's okay for me to learn about this. It's like, no, like wherever you are in life right now, you can learn something, and
mm-hmm.
you can kind of take in what's going on right now, and it might not be perfect, but you do what you can with what you have right now.
Yeah.
And I think that takes a lot of pressure off of us to feel like I have to be at this level right now because I'm at this age, or
Yeah.
by the time I reach this age I better be this and this. Like, take all of that pressure off yourself, because that's, I don't know why we kind of learn that that's the way life works, but it's not. you know um
Yeah.
I always hate the phrase "that's the way the world works," because people usually say it to explain why a negative thing is negative and can't be changed. And it's like, well, the world is made up of people, and we are people. So if we don't want the world to work that way anymore, it won't.
Yeah.
So all you have to do is just do something about it. So I think um uh James Earl Taylor, who I mentioned earlier, who voiced Obi-Wan in Clone Wars, shortly after I found out about my, maybe 2-3 years after I found out about what my OCD was and everything, um, I saw him do his one-man show at Star Wars Weekends. And if you ever get a chance to see him do his one-man show, anybody, please go watch it, because he does like 100 voices in 5 minutes, and he tells like really inspirational stories, and it's fantastic. And something he said, that this was 10 years ago now, and I will never ever forget this. Uh, he said, "Do what you can to change your world. You don't have to change the world. You
Mm-hmm.
just have to change your world." And that really put it in perspective for me. And I think, again, just anything you can do to take the pressure off yourself and not feel like you have to be perfect, you have to reach this certain goal. Anything you can do in that regard is a plus,
Yeah.
and will help you very much in your own journey.
Yeah. Definitely. I think that's very good things to remember. And it can be hard, especially if you struggle with anxiety. And normally with anxiety, there's a perfectionism level in
Mm-hmm.
there, because I struggle with that. And it's hard. It's hard to let go, and it's hard to think of things that way, and take it a little bit at a time and not expect a perfect outcome or different things like that. I mean, that's what's honestly is I have let hold me back for years for like stepping out and doing something. This is the first thing, and I kind of mentioned that a little bit, I think, in the first episode that I did, where I shared a little bit about my Star Wars story. But this is the first thing that I have done completely on my own creatively, that I have put out there from start to finish. It wasn't just an idea that I never could just execute. Like, this is at 34 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard because like I've had so many ideas and so many things that I've wanted to do with my life, but I didn't know exactly how to execute it and how to get from point A to point B. And so, I it's just something that I'm really proud that I've gotten to this place, and it's been a journey. And if I can get here, someone else can too. And,
Mm-hmm.
someone else can can learn more about themselves and get to a better place. And I've kind of had to throw away expectations of what I thought my life would be at a certain age because, like you said, that's normally not reality. And normally that's setting us up for being even harder on ourselves. And that just gives us something to be more negative to ourselves on when we set those expectations. So I think that's another thing to really watch for, even if you don't struggle with mental health, is it is good to have goals and it's good to have aspirations and dreams and different things like that. But don't set up, either expectations that you can't meet and you're just setting them up honestly to be hard on yourself, or unrealistic expectations that you feel from one way or another. And that's just also setting yourself up for having a hard time with things. And even though we can learn from failure, just like Yoda says, and that's one of the greatest teachers, um, we don't have to cause that on
Yeah.
ourselves, and
Yeah.
make it better for yourself. Don't make it harder. The world is
Yeah.
already hard enough and people are already hard enough. Don't make it worse for yourself.
Yeah. Exactly. And I forgot, I left out a piece of what James Arnold Taylor said, but that was what the point of Change Your World was, is that you feel like you have to change the world and it's this monumental task. And we do, like I said, we want to change things for the better. We want to change the world around us for the better. Um, but you do it by changing your world. You make these steps for you, and it's going to start having an effect on other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to, you know, you don't have to look at it as this giant step, I've got to change the world, but like just this one step of like, okay, what do I do in my life? And then that starts to affect other people, and that starts to bring about the change you want to see.
Yeah. And that's such a Star Wars thing too. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
see it so much with the rebellion and the resistance and different things about how so many people made a change for maybe just their community or their planet or the city they lived in or the people just immediately around them. And then it trickled into something bigger. And then they found through that more people that were trying to do the same thing. And then it continually changed until they brought down an empire. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things where we might not be bringing down an empire, but we can still make those small steps. And maybe that's what happens in the next generation or another generation after that. You can start something small and just make it better for you and the people around you or your community. And then it can turn into something better. And don't put pressure on yourself to see what that turns into. Just do it and then see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That is a
So are
very
there,
Star Wars thing.
yeah, it is. It is. It
Yeah.
really is. It really makes me think of Andor too, and
Yeah.
and just the different people that like didn't even set out to be in the rebellion or didn't
Mm-hmm.
set out to change the entire galaxy. Like that's not what they were trying to do. They were just trying to help their friend, or they were just trying
Mm-hmm.
to help their family, or different things. And then it turned into being something bigger than a lot of people could have expected. And I love that about Star Wars because yes, there's a Jedi and they have, these cool powers with the Force and they have lightsabers and things like that. But there's also so many stories of just regular everyday people. And a lot of the Jedi are just regular everyday people, like where they came from, and seeing them come into their own, whether it is just helping their neighbors and making that a better place, or if it's turning into being a general in a rebellion or being a Jedi. Like they all started nowhere,
Mm-hmm.
and to see them be able to truly become who they are is, I think, something that anybody wants for someone else that they care about, is for them to change and grow and be confident and turn into the best version of who they can be. And I think it's cool to get to see that again in
Mm-hmm.
in Star Wars.
Yep. Definitely.
So, out of all of these things, I know we've talked about a lot of takeaways, but
Yes.
what are some of the things that you think from your story with Star Wars and how that's helped you? And then, secondly, also through your mental health journey that you want people to take away from this, or you hope people would take away from this?
Yeah. Well, I think, don't give up. It's a very simple thing to say, but don't give up. And I know we're on a Star Wars podcast, but the one thing that equals my Star Wars fandom is my Lord of the Rings fandom.
I love it.
And one of my favorite lines in Lord of the Rings is when Aragorn says, "There is always hope." And
Yes.
it's just a very simple line, but really, if you really think about that and apply it, like, it's easy to be cynical and it's easy to be negative, and we might even have plenty of good reasons for it, but uh, hope is always the better choice, and perseverance is always the better choice. And as dark as it may seem now, it will get better. You'll get on the other side of it. Um, and whether it be, of course, I always come back to Obi-Wan, but all sorts of characters, like if you take them at a certain point in the series and go, wow, right now they are like a good 30 years from, you know, getting the outcome they want to get. But I know that they're going to stick with it. And I know that along the way, they're still going to make impactful choices. They're going to, I'll just stick with Obi-Wan. From the fall of the Republic to the fall of the Empire, which of course Obi-Wan's not alive for the fall of the Empire, but ghosts can see things too. So, you just think about how hard of a stretch that's got to be for Obi-Wan, but he still does good things. He watches over Luke. Obviously, he goes and saves Leia. He gets Luke on his journey that eventually reunites him with Leia, and it's even Obi-Wan who first meets Chewie, who
Mm-hmm.
introduces him to Han, who gets them on the Millennium Falcon. And it's like that is a rough couple decades for Obi-Wan, but you look at all these little things that happened in between, and there were very good, very valuable things that happened. And it made all the difference in the Star Wars galaxy. And so I would say don't feel like you have to be perfect, and don't feel like it's very easy to get caught up in feeling like a failure, and I struggle with self-confidence all the time. But don't get caught up in that negativity, because um your story is still unfolding right now. It's not like your story is something that's saved for many years down the line, when you've reached a point you think you need to get at, when you've
Yeah.
accomplished a certain number of goals or whatever. Your story is happening right now, and your story is important, so that means that right now is important. So get um don't get too caught up in the negatives. Don't get too hard on yourself. um and it can be hard to cling to the hope, and you're going to have bad days, but um just always try to come back to that hope and that positivity, and stick with other people who feel the same way, and who engage the same way you do, because that's going to positively impact your journey. And I think sometimes you might look back and say, like, Wow, that was a rough time, but I also have some really good memories from that time. I had some really valuable experiences from that time. And, I think a phrase that I like to use is two things can be true, and that brings me a lot of peace about a lot of things is like you might be in this really negative time period right now, or maybe this relationship with a friend is very negative, or a family member or something, but at the same time there are positives that are true. At the same time, you are alive, you have the ability to impact others, you have the ability to change your life for the better. you know just recognize that two things can be true. And while there might be negativity, that does not define you, that does not define your world. And I think that uh is a very long way of saying um you know have hope, be positive,
Yeah.
keep believing.
Yeah. No, those are great takeaways and great reminders, and things not only from Star Wars, but also like your story and Obi-Wan and things that you've gone through in life too. So thank you for sharing those things and being vulnerable and talking about this with me, and knowing that other people are going to hear this, and hopefully it will help somebody else and help them have hope and have maybe a more positive outlook on life and what it can be, and in the direction that they can go with things. So yeah, thank you for that. And
Thank you.
yeah, and always on kind of a less serious note, I always ask people kind of a fun question at the end. Since you are a filmmaker, and I'm sure you've thought about this, if you could write and direct or whatever you wanted to do, a story that is Star Wars, what would that look like?
I have thought about that. That is such a good question, though, because it changes sometimes too. Sometimes you're
Yeah.
like, oh, they should really do this kind of story, and then they'll put out a book of that, and then it's like,
Yeah.
okay, so now what do I think is the best thing that hasn't been done yet? Um, I'm not entirely sure what time period I would set it, but I would say something before uh, Phantom Menace with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. And the book Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray is excellent. That is a fantastic story. I definitely recommend it. Something along those lines. I
Yeah.
think that Qui-Gon is one of the most interesting stories, or one of the most interesting characters in Star Wars.
Hmm.
And, I think the ultimate what if question of Star Wars is not what if Anakin didn't turn to the dark side, it's what if Qui-Gon had lived.
Hmm.
I think many things would have been different. And so I think, kind of exploring Qui-Gon some more would be a really cool story to tell. And even tying in, his own time as a Padawan under Dooku, which of course we got in a little bit of in Tales of the Jedi, and then also
Hmm.
there's some flashbacks in the book Dooku Jedi Lost. But you know, Count Dooku had that like mistrust of the Republic, and or even the Jedi Council, and Qui-Gon did too, but Qui-Gon applied it correctly, and
Hmm.
Dooku did not. And while Obi-Wan does not um, obviously take on every quality of Qui-Gon, he does take on many good ones. And I think that there's a lot to be explored in there. Whether a film or a TV show, I would gladly do either one. But yeah, I think anything with like a younger Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, um, I think that there's a lot of good character stuff that could be explored there,
Yeah.
and I would have a lot of fun with that. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be fun. That would be a really fun, um, just dynamic, I think, to explore too, and the lessons that could happen through that. And yeah, I think that's
Hmm.
a great choice of characters and time frame, and something that I think a lot of people would also be interested in seeing a little bit more of.
Yeah.
So good. And it's like, too, like, not to get on something else, but it really shows too, again, how when people are going through a hard time or they're questioning something, it's like they can go one or two ways. They can lean on someone that is more for the light, or they can lean on someone that's more dark, or kind of go down more of a dark situation. And so it just made me think of this, and I don't know why, but I guess since I feel like I need to say it, I will. But if you're someone out there too that maybe doesn't struggle with mental illness, but knows someone who does, please be that light place for
Hmm.
them to lean on. Because as we see with different characters in Star Wars, sometimes they needed that person. And not that their decisions are not their own personal decisions, and that's their responsibility. So if someone you know is making bad decisions, that's not your fault. But at the same time, like, try your best to be there for that person, because sometimes it can be a very lonely and dark place, and your mind can tell you a lot of lies and a lot of things that aren't true when you're struggling. And having someone, even if it's just saying, "Hey, I don't know what you're going through, I don't understand, but tell me how I can be there for you, and I'm here for you," means a lot, even if someone doesn't take you up on that offer. So it made me think of that when you were talking about
Hmm.
that. So I hope people know that, you can make a difference in someone's life that's struggling, and you might not know about it till later. Someone might be in a really
Yeah.
dark place, and it might be years down the road that they come back into your life and say, "Hey, that really meant a lot. Thank you. That helped me from XYZ," or whatever. Um, but just like Obi-Wan, if they do make not great decisions like Anakin did, um, I mean, that was beyond just not great decisions, but you know what I mean, just
Yes.
for
Yes.
reference's sake. If someone turns to unhealthy coping mechanisms, or I even hate to go here, but they choose to not continue with their battle, know that that isn't on you. And
Hmm.
you know that's someone else's choice, but do the best that you can, I guess, to be there for those people, because they do need it. So
Yeah. Yeah. And you have no idea the kind of positive impact that you can have.
yeah.
So yeah, I think that's very, very good advice.
Yeah, and I think Qui-Gon was definitely a positive impact for
Hmm.
Obi-Wan.
Hmm.
So back to what you said, I think that would be a great piece of time that I would honestly love to explore more. I would watch whatever you did,
Yeah.
because I would love that. And I
Hmm.
would love to see, like, the story too of Obi-Wan when Satine is, when she's sadly, heartbreaking, but she's dying, and
Yeah.
he says, if you would, back at this time, if you had asked me to leave the Jedi
Yeah.
Order, I would love to see that story
Yeah.
too.
Maybe that's the story right there.
Yeah, that would be a good
Because
one as well.
I feel like Qui-Gon wouldn't be like, hey, that's against, you're not allowed to love, that's against Jedi code. I feel
Yeah.
like Qui-Gon would be like, um, like just apply some kind of lesson to it, like what can you learn from this, young one, or something like that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, to see how he handles that. That would be interesting too. Well,
hmm.
Rory, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and talking about all of these things with me. And especially doing it right now during this month. And yeah, just thank you for being open and vulnerable with that and sharing that with everybody listening. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I appreciate you giving us a space to do so and letting us feel comfortable in sharing.
Well, good. That's what I hope. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me today on Tales of the Force. Our stories of hope is the force of this fandom, and they are a powerful ally to each and every one of us. Life creates them, makes them grow. Their energy surrounds us and binds us together. Don't forget, luminous beings we all are, not this crude matter. May the Force be with you, always.